What's up, everyone? Julie Schatz here, singer, songwriter, music producer. My YouTube channel is Julie Schatz Music. Make sure you go check that out. I have some upcoming releases I'm really excited about, free beats, tutorials, and all kinds of other stuff on that channel. I am so excited to be back at it with Splice, giving you a tutorial on melodies. I did one a few weeks ago that was giving you a crash course in music theory and showing you some tips from a music theory perspective on how to create better melodies for your beats. And this time we're going to be focused on rhythmic variations. So I have 4 tips for you. Let's get right into it. Tip number 1. Creating contrast with staccato and legato notes. And staccato, if you don't know, is just simply short notes, and legato is elongated notes. So in particular, we're going to look at first how you can use this toward your advantage in terms of an arrangement that will help create some dynamics in your melodies. So let's get right into Logic. I'm going to show you one of my sessions that's a good example of this. Using the staccato versus legato, I have an example of that here. After the intro, you're going to hear this violin part, and you can kind of see how I've chopped it up. I have these staccato notes here, and then it goes into this more legato melody. So let's take a listen. So that just creates some really interesting dynamics as you have that staccato feel that gives this essence of tension, and then it goes into this elongated melody that's also contrasting with the piano line that I have going on. So that kind of contrast is in terms of the arrangement with just looking at one instrument. But as I mentioned, we have other instrumentation, and there's contrast going on between how those melodies are set up rhythmically. So that takes me to tip number 2, which is creating different rhythms between the different instruments in your track. I have this flute sample here in the beginning. This is actually part of a free sample pack that I have. I do have one of those free sample packs available to you as part of this video, and another separate sample pack that was posted with the first video I did with Splice, so go check that out. Let's take a listen from the beginning of this flute sample with the piano also playing with it. So you can see that the piano here is just simply playing 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So it's just playing 8th notes, and then our flute melody has a little bit more variation, so those contrast really nicely. The piano kind of acts as a foundation for the flute melody to stand out. And another thing that's happening is we've got these pickup notes going on, which I'm going to get into in the next point a little bit. But it's just to show you how this is another example of contrasting, because we have this steady 8th note pattern going on in the piano, and then our flute melody has a little bit more of elongated notes, but it also has these pickup notes that drive the beat. Take a listen to that again. So it's got the 2 pickup notes just on the 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. So that's just a simple way of, there's a little bit of space and then those 2 notes, 4 and, right going back into the 1 and repeating that melody. Tip number 3, syncopation. Syncopation, just think of it simply as the beats that you hear in between the 1, 2, 3, 4. So for example, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, if I just took the and, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, it's the off beats. So if you vary your melody between those dominant beats, the 1, 2, 3, 4, and add notes on the ands, it really creates a lot more energy in your track and creates a swing and a bounce. Splice actually made a really good point with this in a melody tutorial they posted, where they talk about creating that syncopation in a bass line, so adding those notes in between. And as I mentioned, that can be really helpful if you want to add pickup notes to lead into another melody that just drives the beat. So we're going to look at another session for this, and I'm also going to be talking about how you can create this kind of bounce and energy in your bass lines. Let's take a listen to this session. This is the bass line down here. If we break it down, it's as simple as, for example, right in the beginning, boom, boom, all I'm doing there is one E. So when we talk about that syncopation, it doesn't just have to be on the and, it could be on the 16th note. So one E and a, two E and a, and that's exactly what I'm doing in the beginning of this bass line. And then you can see I have another sort of pickup to the pickup note, and this is also on an offbeat. So that creates a real swing. If I move it over here, let's hear what that sounds like. So it's a little bit more straight, bum bum ba-da, one, and it's on the 8th note. So if I add it on that offbeat compared to if I'm counting in the 8th notes, it just creates even more of a bounce. And so you can see I have a lot of variation too between staccato and legato notes. And I've got that sort of pickup on the one. Other parts of the bass line, the pickup is in this sort of busy melody leading into the one of the next downbeat. Like over here, for example. So that's right on the one there, but I've got this this fun little line leading up to it. So I've got contrast in how I'm using rhythms in the different parts of this bass line. And let's take a look at the piano too. I've got some syncopation going on as well. I've got chords and a little bit of melody on top. So it's kind of straight at the end. Dun, 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 dun. So if I wanted to maybe make this a little more interesting, I could take this note and maybe bring it to the middle so that it's on a 16th note. It's basically on the and E, on the E leading back into the one. Let's hear what that sounds like. So, it's just sort of depending on the style that you're looking for. That's just one way to create different feels, different grooves in your melody. And tip number 4. I think actually this is the most important in some aspects. Tip number 4 is allowing space in your melodies. So not just 1E and a 2E and 16th note patterns everywhere, 32nd note, even 8th note patterns throughout. You want to create space in your melodies. You want to make sure you have contrast going on, so some of your instrumentation has enough space to allow for other instruments to be a little bit busier. And then in general, you want to be able to have the track breathe and have enough room for the artist to add what they're going to add to it. So this is really important to keep in mind as you're experimenting with different rhythms in your melodies. And you can see how in the piano, for example, on this track I just showed you, is really spacey. I've got chords on pretty much every downbeat and little flourishes in terms of melody on top, but I've got a lot of space in between. My bass is really busy, so that just allows the two instruments to work really well together. So let's take one more listen to that. So just a little recap. Tip number 1, we talked about using staccato and legato note variations. Specifically throughout your arrangement, if we're just talking about one instrument, we can use staccato notes in one part of the arrangement and then go into elongated notes in the next part, or vice versa. And this will just create a lot of interesting dynamics throughout your track. Tip number 2 was using different rhythms, contrasting rhythms between your different instruments in your tracks. So not just throughout your arrangement in a given instrument, but making sure that you have different rhythmic patterns for the different instruments in your track so that they work well together and they're not clashing too much and you can hear all of them. And I showed you also how you can do that with a bass line. The bass line could be the busier part of the track, and the piano can be more of the support and be more spacey. And those can work well in tandem as an example. Tip number 3, we talked about syncopation. So using those in-between notes, 1 and 2 and 3, and even counting 16th notes, using the E, so 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and, using those offbeats can be really important to just making sure your track doesn't sound stale rhythmically, and to create energy and a bounce and even a swing feel in your track. And tip number 4 was leaving space in your melodies. You want to make sure first and foremost that your artist has enough room to lay down their part on the track. You don't necessarily need all of your instruments to be super busy. In general, you want to make sure that they're not all busy. They want to have their own respective space throughout the track and work well together with the different rhythms they may have going on. And this can also mean you want to create more space in certain parts of your track versus others to make sure the arrangement is dynamic. So I hope this was helpful to you in terms of actually using rhythmic variations to achieve different feels and to make sure your track is working in terms of all the instruments working together and the track sounding interesting in terms of creating dynamics using rhythms. Thanks so much for watching.